Each one of those figures is 1,000 men. These are human lives with families and kids and mothers and brothers and fathers.
8.7 million
Guys.
is the official tally by the Russian government.
Everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mikey Reacts. I'm really excited for you guys to be back. We're on a bit of a history kick, a bit of a knowledge kick. This one isn't really based directly at the United States that I'm doing today. It is more of a world history kind of thing. But I will be reacting to the fallen of World War II. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. I'm not coming at this from a position of ignorance. I know a fair bit of World War II. In fact, I spent the last 6-7 years, whenever I had an opportunity, I would travel to a battlefield of World War I or World War II in Europe. Of course, not in the South Pacific, because I've never really made it that far. But I've been to places like Bastogne, Normandy, Eindhoven, of course, areas in the UK where the Battle of Britain took place in the skies. I've been to the Somme, Passchendaele. So I've been to these battlefields, and I really enjoy sort of seeing what these places look like now, knowing from pictures what these places did look like. So I'm a big World War II history nut. So I'm not coming at this from a position of ignorance. I actually understand the cost of the Second World War. However, as far as I understand, this shows it visually. So this might blow my mind a little bit in terms of actually really, because you think 20 million people dead, 20 million Russians dead, between 20 and 40. You don't really register that number. So we're gonna see the extent of it. I don't know if it will show Japan as well, because Japan obviously lost a lot of men, women and children, of course, in the Second World War. So this, I don't think, is representative of the civilian cost of the loss of life, which was extremely high in the Second World War. Both on the European continent in the conflict in Europe and also in the Pacific. So we're going to get to this. Before we do, don't forget, there are links in the description for Twitter, Instagram and Patreon. Patreon will be focused on politics, history, socioeconomic issues, and a lot of opinion pieces. So if you want to check me out there, check me out. I'll be posting my first Patreon video roughly the same time that I'm posting this video. So you can see some exclusive content that won't be on YouTube. And also don't forget, if you want to support me and this channel, which is just me, there is a super thanks button down below that you can donate money to. And it really helps this channel grow and it allows me to keep doing what I'm doing. Also, I won't bore you too much. Don't forget, subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave comments down below of anything else you want to see. Or if you just don't like what you see, let me know. It helps me somehow anyway, because the more comments I get, the more reach the videos themselves get, preferably good comments. But let's get to this video. I won't keep you long and talk and bore you. So this is the fallen of World War II. It's not going to be a happy reaction video, but it's going to be an interesting one at the very least. Don't be surprised if I don't gasp, because of course I know near enough these numbers already, but I'm interested in the cinematic aspect of it. So let's get to it and play.
The average lifespan of an American is 80 years. And an 80-year-old today was 10 when World War II ended.
Mad.
4 when it began. A soldier who saw battle would have to be in his late 80s, at least today. Generals, political leaders, the decision makers of the war, few are still with us. And over the past few decades, we've seen authors and filmmakers rush to capture stories from survivors before this connection of memory is lost.
I've got a lot to say about that. I'll say at the end of the video. Sorry, I'll pause it here actually. I'll pause it here. Yeah, that is very important, guys. If you know someone who of course, is very unlikely at the moment, who ever served in World War II, don't just you guys will have a lot of people who served in Korea and Vietnam. I myself know people who served in Korea and Vietnam, and they won't really tend to talk about it, and that's absolutely fine. Don't push them, but getting these stories out can be very important as well, because you don't really understand the horrors and the impact of war until you talk to someone from firsthand. Some really good interviews to look out for are the ones that were done for Band of Brothers, especially Richard Winters. Major Dick Winters was a national treasure. No, he is. His memory is still there. He's a national treasure, and what he has to say is incredible, heartbreaking, and heartwarming all at the same time. So I would really recommend you look at his interviews.
Project is not about individual war stories, and it's not about survivors. We're going to tally up the tens of millions of people whose lives were cut short by the war, and see how these numbers stack up to other wars in history, including trends in recent conflicts. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately.
Okay, so they are doing civilians also.
Each of these figures represents 1,000 people who died. Civilians were of all walks of life, whereas military deaths were almost entirely men. The average age was about 23.
That's crazy.
In most battles, for every 1,000 soldiers killed, there are more than 1,000 who were injured. The word casualty...
Of course I knew that, but him saying out loud, it just... 23, your life hasn't started yet. You haven't experienced anything. Oh my God.
Confusing, because in military speak, it often includes both deaths and injuries, and anything else that takes a soldier out of service. Here, we're just counting the deaths. And we'll begin with American soldiers.
The United States gave a lot in this conflict. Young men who had never been to Europe before in their entire
Over
life.
400,000 died. Most of the deaths occurred in the European theater, fighting the Nazis.
Sorry guys, it just blows my mind, because these American young men had probably never even left the United States in their entire lives. They had no true perception of where or what Europe was, or they understood Hitler was evil, they understood what was happening, but it was not their war until it had to be their war. You understand that? No Nazi came onto American land. I know, of course, obviously the Japanese in Pearl Harbour, was it 7th of December, 1941, I believe. Yes, I know that, but a lot of these men wouldn't understand the business they had in Europe, aside from the fact that Nazis and Hitler were evil, and the fact they died for a conflict that was started by an Austrian thousands and thousands of miles away across an ocean, midway through a different continent, and they died for it. It's mind-blowing, because one group of people, again, across an ocean, in the center of an entirely separate continent, separated by sea, rock, and air, halfway across the other side of the world, because he wanted to take Czechoslovakia and Poland, two countries that were of no significance to the United States, they died for. It's mad.
And about a quarter were in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. When you put them on the timeline, you see that casualties were the heaviest at the end of the war.
Yeah, of course.
The war began on September 1st, 1939. But the US wasn't willing to join the fight until Pearl Harbor, 2 years in.
December 7th.
The deaths increased drastically on D-Day, when the Allies invaded Normandy.
Yeah.
One of the most tragic moments of the war was on D-Day at Omaha Beach, where 2,500 Americans fell. So about the same number of US soldiers died on this single beach landing as the entire 13 years of the recent war in Afghanistan. The bloodiest battle in the Pacific was Okinawa, which lasted 82 days, during which 12,500 Americans died.
Wow. Wow.
About 5,000 of these deaths were at sea.
Guys, imagine 12,500 people.
Kamikaze attacks. Now let's look at some other countries, starting with Europe. Germany started World War II when it invaded Poland.
They started it, mate.
Poland ultimately lost 200,000 soldiers in the war.
Wow.
Most died after the invasion while the country was occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union.
200,000 is a lot of men.
Germany, meanwhile, lost just 16,000 in the invasion of Poland.
It's still a lot, man.
The Nazis went on to invade and conquer other countries, including Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Greece, and Yugoslavia. France surrendered.
By the way, if you don't know the story of Greece, about the Italian invasion of Greece, the failed Italian invasion of Greece, it's a very inspiring story where few men stood against many. I know you've heard this story before, and they repelled the Italian invaders, and it was only until the Nazis started parachuting men in was Greece taken. But you should read the story. I believe it was, just look at the story. They've done a few press conferences in the White House about this story.
But after losing 92,000 soldiers in the Battle of France.
That's it. It was Winston Churchill who said, from this day on, we will not say that Greeks fight like heroes, but we will say that heroes fight like Greeks. That is a big thing.
Over 200,000 ultimately fell, which includes deaths in POW camps, French colonies, and other fighting. Yugoslavia suffered almost 500,000 military deaths.
Damn.
The initial invasion brought relatively few casualties on both sides. But the deaths mounted under Nazi occupation due to guerrilla fighting, civil conflict, and mass executions.
That's ridiculous.
The Nazi invasions were swift, with relatively few German losses. Even the Nazi commanders expressed surprise at their success. And then we have the United Kingdom and the United States, who were not invaded, but took the fight to the Nazis. Britain lost about the same number of soldiers as the US, which includes the British colonies. Germany lost about 500,000 soldiers fighting the US and Britain in what is known as the Western Front, which took place in France and Belgium.
Fuck around, find out, mate.
But most Nazi soldiers died in the Eastern Front. Germany's unsuccessful invasion of the Soviet Union.
That winter was
Numbers
harsh.
are staggering.
Jesus.
The most famous battle of the Eastern Front, and perhaps the turning point of the European war, was Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army successfully took Stalingrad, but then got surrounded by the Soviets and cut off from food and ammunition. 500,000 Nazis would ultimately die in Stalingrad. Another 100,000 were taken prisoner, of which 6,000 would ever return. POWs had a low survival rate throughout World War II, and it was particularly grim in the East. When you include these POWs, roughly the same number of Germans died in Stalingrad as all the Western Front fighting against France, the UK, and the US.
One city.
And though Stalingrad was a victory for the Soviets, they suffered almost twice as many losses as Germany.
Jeez. But they weren't given proper boots. They were sharing firearms. It was like literally one rifle per every 2 men. So the guy in front of you, when he got shot, you took his rifle, and it carried on like that. They did not look after their soldiers. They didn't have any funding. The Lend-Lease Act that gave the Russians tanks from the United States was only good for so much. They really didn't have the resources to fight this war. The way they won these battles was by throwing inferiorly trained men towards the superiorly trained Nazis. The Nazis were very well trained, guys. The German army was very, very well trained. So the only way that the Russians managed to ever win a battle against the Nazis was by sheer manpower. And that's why they lost so many people. They did not care about human life one bit.
The Soviet Union would eventually defeat the once unstoppable German army, killing 2.3 million Nazi soldiers.
Well, actually, it was the weather that really defeated the Nazis, but that's fine. I'm not taking anything away from the Russians. They did a fantastic job.
But winning the war
look at that.
Came at a cost.
Look at that. Look at that. You guys don't understand how many people this is. It won't stop for a while now. Yep. Each one of those figures is 1,000 men. These are human lives with families and kids and mothers and brothers and fathers.
8.7 million is the official tally by the Russian military, a hotly disputed number. Some studies have calculated as many as 14 million dead.
Guys, that's the population of New York.
To complete the count of European military deaths, we need to add German deaths from other fronts, including the North and Africa, as well as deaths from other Axis powers allied with the Nazis, Hungary, Romania, and Italy.
Yeah, they were very ineffective, those countries.
When you put these European military deaths on the timeline, it looks like this. You can now interact with the chart to learn more. Pause the narration if you would like more time.
It's mad. Absolutely mad. Sorry for pausing, guys. I'm just very passionate.
And now we switch to civilian deaths in Europe. Six million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust.
Oh, I estimated it. I think it was higher.
If you separate this by country, you see that about half, 2.7 million, were Polish. 700,000 were Soviets, followed by Hungary and 17 other countries.
Is this going to mention...
Broken down another way, about half of the 6 million were killed in the concentration camps. Over 1 million died in Auschwitz. Most were killed in the gas chambers. Others died from starvation, exhaustion, disease, and other forms of execution.
Guys, it is worse than you can ever imagine.
The second most deadly camp was Treblinka, which was exclusively an extermination camp, set up to look like a train station.
Yeah, I've heard about this. They did not know they were going there. It was evil is not the word for Treblinka, for any of these camps. But Treblinka was beyond evil because it was inviting and welcoming to a degree. But there was no work to be done at Treblinka. It was not a concentration camp or a prison camp. It was you went and you died, and that was it. It was ridiculous.
Mobile killing groups killed 1.4 million Jews.
This was more common than people know.
Like with the gas chambers, men were killed first to reduce the risk of revolt.
Yeah. Forget about orders, mate. Just don't be a... Orders aren't orders if they're to kill civilians. There's no honor in that human being.
The Holocaust also includes non-Jewish deaths.
Yeah.
Between 130,000 to 500,000 Roma, then called gypsies, were killed. The numbers are disputed. About 250,000 people with disabilities were killed. Homosexuals, Catholics, and other groups were also exterminated, but their numbers were relatively small. Some historians say that other civilian deaths should go under the label of Holocaust. About 2 million non-Jewish Poles were killed under German occupation, some of which were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. When you combine civilian and military deaths, over 16% of the total Polish population died in World War II, which is the highest percentage of any country.
16%.
But not the highest in total death count. The Soviet Union again tops that list,
with 20
losing at least
million?
as many civilians as it did soldiers.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 10 and 20 million.
Yeah.
A particularly dark moment for the Soviet Union.
It's higher than that. It's higher than that because they killed their own men too.
Was the siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. German forces surrounded Leningrad before civilians could be evacuated. supplies, including food, were cut off for 2.5 years. 1.5 million people died as a result, mostly from starvation, mostly civilians. Stalin's cruelty towards his own people is partly responsible for these numbers. He often didn't allow civilians to evacuate from cities, thinking it would cause the soldiers protecting them to fight harder. About 1 million Soviets died in Stalin's own labor camps, called the Gulag. Just about every country suffered civilian losses, especially countries who were invaded. While many died as a result of so-called collateral damage, the biggest numbers occurred when it was no accident. Civilians were exterminated, purposely fired upon or bombed, used as human shields, or intentionally deprived of food.
It was a disgusting war.
The intentional killing of civilians was done by most warring parties, including the United Kingdom and the United States. The United Kingdom was spared of a land invasion, but still lost 60,000 civilians, largely from German air raids or blitzes, often directed at civilian population centers.
Americans, if you ever visit London, visit a bomb shelter. There are still some around. It's really, really interesting to see. Of course, we used to use the London Underground. The pictures are harrowing. The remnants are still there. And it's an amazing piece of our history. It makes me proud to be British, the Blitz, how British men and women stood together. It really does.
The UK did the same to German cities at a much greater magnitude.
Yeah, they started the war though.
Causing about 10 times the number of deaths. But most German civilian deaths came from the ground at the late stage of the war.
Yeah.
When the Nazi regime collapsed, civilians living in occupied regions had to desperately flee from the advancing Soviet army. Rapes were widespread, and death estimates ranged from 600,000 to 3 million.
It's mad. The Russians just as bad.
Let's step back and see where we are with the totals. We just counted about 20 million civilian deaths in Europe. If you add this to the European military deaths we already covered, it brings us to over 40 million.
Yeah.
Then we have the Asian theater. Here we see the vast majority of military deaths in Asia came from China and Japan. On the civilian side, about 6 million deaths from China, Indonesia, Korea, Indochina, and the Philippines can be attributed to Japanese war crimes, which are sometimes compared to the Nazi atrocities due to the sheer scale of the cruelty.
Yeah.
China had the second highest death count after the Soviet Union. And like the Soviets, the Chinese government demonstrated a stunning willingness to sacrifice its own people.
Yeah.
Chinese nationalists opened the dike at the Yellow River, hoping the flood would halt the Japanese advance.
But it killed a bunch of people.
500,000 Chinese civilians or more were killed, which is 2 or 3 times the number who died in all countries in the 2004 Asian tsunamis. But the invasion of China only cost Japan 200,000 soldiers. Most were killed fighting the US and allies in the Pacific War. A significant portion of Japanese civilian deaths were caused by American firebombing and the 2 nuclear attacks. Contrary to official US statements, these airstrikes were directed at civilian populations, not military targets.
Of course they were, but what else can you do?
When you add all the deaths outside Europe, it brings us to a grand total of 70 million for the war, give or take depending on who's counting and what civilian deaths get included. More people died in World War II than in any other war in history.
Yeah.
For comparison, here are 20 or so of the very worst wars and atrocities we have on record. Some of these are more of atrocities than wars, but we've seen how that distinction can get blurry. Some of these spanned across centuries. World War II had the highest body count, and it all happened in just 6 years. The world's population has grown significantly since the earliest atrocities on this list. If you want to compare them in terms of what percentage of the world died, we can adjust the chart to look like this.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
This rough approximation tells us there may have been more devastating wars before World War II, proportionally speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. Still 70 million though, mate. 70 million human beings. A lot of them kids.
When we turn to post-war conflicts, it's hard to say anything that isn't controversial. But the data shows something quite extraordinary has been happening. In 1989, John Gaddis coined the phrase, the long peace. to identify the absence of conflict between the nuclear powers during the Cold War.
Yeah, I mean though, but you had Korea and Vietnam. I know they weren't nuclear powers, but a lot of veterans won't tell you that that was a peaceful period.
25 years later, the Cold War is over, and the term is still being used, although its meaning may have shifted.
Yeah.
European countries have not fought each other, except for this 10-day war in 1956 when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary. When we look at European wars before World War II, it looks like this.
No. You had the war in Cyprus in 1974. You had, what else? Sorry guys, you had Greece and Turkey fighting a civil war, a proxy war in the 1960s. They're European powers. What else do you have? You had the Bosnian War. So, I mean, yeah, not major powers, but...
They tend to be more frequent as you go back, though smaller in scale. And the largest 44 economies of the world have not battled each other since World War II.
Okay, the largest 44 economies.
Rich countries have fought poorer countries, like the US versus Iraq. But rich countries have not fought other rich countries. Such a period of peace between the so-called great powers hasn't been seen since the Roman Empire.
Okay, the great powers.
To many, peace is too strong of a word. Wars have occurred since World War II, and they can be grouped into these 4 categories. We don't see colonial wars anymore. We've already noted that interstate wars between rich countries have not occurred at all, and here we see wars involving smaller economies have tapered off. That leaves civil wars of 2 types, with and without foreign intervention. And this is what these battle deaths look like alongside of World War II. More people died fighting in World War II than in all the wars since.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And again, we can't forget about world population, which has almost tripled since World War II. If we scale these numbers to show deaths in proportion to world population, showing the likelihood that a person on Earth dies in battle, the downward trend becomes even more pronounced.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't to infer anything about why this trend is occurring. That's a discussion for another day. You can now interact with this chart to explore what conflicts are behind the totals. Now bear in mind, we're just looking at battle deaths here, not civilian deaths, but those too are in decline. Peace is a difficult thing to measure.
Yeah.
It's a bit like counting the people who didn't die in wars that never happened. We give such importance to the word peace, but we don't tend to notice it when it occurs.
It's true.
Or report on it. Sometimes it takes reminding ourselves of how terrible war once was to see the peace that has been growing around us. Of course, this trend may not continue, and it's not clear how looking at these charts can help us make the right decisions to ensure that it does. But the longer the long peace grows, the more significant it becomes.
That's pretty cool. I like what he's doing there.
So if watching the news doesn't make us feel hopeful about where things are heading, watching the numbers might.
Okay. Wow. Amazing. Alright, it's already been a 28-minute video, so I won't keep you guys for too long, but that was really obviously eye-opening. I already knew some base figures already, but that was really eye-opening in terms of just visually, just how many people died. Yeah, thankfully there hasn't been a war like that since, and I really hope there won't be a war like that ever again. Major European powers battling each other, what? The largest 44 world economies. Okay, so Russia's obviously currently in a conflict with, or Ukraine's currently in conflict with Russia. It's not their fault. I mean, it's not Ukraine's fault, just to clarify. But I suppose Ukraine isn't a major power, so it's kind of different, I guess. But yeah, that was very eye-opening, very harrowing. We should really pay attention to these numbers and really understand them, because I think to not repeat history is, to understand history is not repeat it. So I'll leave my comments, I'll keep them to a minimum here. That was, I pretty much commented throughout the video. I'm sorry for pausing a lot. I'm very passionate about this topic, so if I paused and I talked a lot, that's because I'm so passionate about it, so I do apologize. I can't really help it. But whilst we're here, so it's coming to the end of the video now, it's a half-an-hour video already. I want to thank you all for your support. Thank you for being here and watching. Don't forget to subscribe, which I bet you're doing right this second, and like this video. Leave any comments down below or any feedback or anything else you want to see. And if you guys want to support me, the links are in the description for my Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon. And there is also a super thanks button, which you can hit anytime you want. So, oh, sorry, just had this 7-Up. Oh, bad decision. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you on the next one.